in action, saying Ferilino should fulfill her duties, which includes immediately releasing the Comic Division's decision. An anti-cybercrime agency tells lawmakers it found no evidence Comic servers were hacked, but believes there was a breach in the system of its software provider, Smartmatic. Undersecretary Cesar Mancao of the Cybercrime Investigation and Coordination Center refused to disclose details at the public hearing of a joint congressional oversight committee. The panel granted his request for an executive session instead. CNN Philippines trying to reach Smartmatic for comment. Meanwhile, Comelec allayed fears the supposed breach would impact the May 9 elections.
It's Smartmatic. We believe that their system is compromised and that we are not also accusing them for doing it themselves. At this moment, we know that there cannot be an external or internal threat actors that in play. We have identified the group that claimed, and we have sufficient artifacts.
The participation of the provider is more on just providing the software itself. We do not give them information. The event that there are hacking incident, allegedly hacking in this incident in our provider, we are pretty much sure that the election is still intact because we do not provide them any information or any sensitive data information.
A number of agencies are looking into the alleged hacking of Comelec servers earlier this month. The Department of Information and Communications Technology says no one could have accessed 60 gigabytes of data as reported by the Manila Bulletin. Here's an update on some presidential aspirants. Former Senator Bongbong Marcos misses another presidential interview, this time with radio station DZBB. Management announced the interview will not push through 30 minutes before the supposed airing. Marcos also missed his online caravan for the transport sector. His team says they're having a difficult time contacting the presidential hopeful in Tagum City. His sister, Senator Amy Marcos, subbed for him in the interview instead. In his interview with TV host Boy Abunda last Thursday, Manila Mayor Isko Moreno said two of his rivals are also good options for the presidency, while two others are only out for revenge.
Bakit hindi dapat iboto si Senator Lacson?
Pwede naman iboto rin, ma.
Senator Pacquiao?
Mabait naman siya eh. Okay naman.
Si VP Lenny?
Maghihiganti sa mga Marcos at Duterte.
Senator Marcos?
Maghihiganti sa mga Dilawan at Pinklawan.
Bakit ikaw ang dapat iboto?
Hindi ako maghihiganti kanino man.
In the same interview, Moreno said he is against abortion, even for rape victims, as he believes only God can take away lives. Senator Ping Lacson thanking Moreno for his remarks about fellow presidential hopefuls. That's according to Lacson's camp, which also said the senator finds merit in Moreno's desire to lead without vengeance. And Senator Manny Pacquiao asserting he is ready for the presidency after Vice President Leni Robredo claimed his sincerity is not enough for him to gun for the country's top post. Pacquiao says he will not run if he didn't know how to solve the country's problems. Robredo has said she only responded honestly to what she thought about her rivals during her interview aired last Wednesday. Kapisanan ng mga broadcaster ng Pilipinas or KBP in partnership with CNN Philippines and other member networks will gather presidential aspirants in a forum next Friday, February 4. Moderated by senior anchor Rico Hizon and ABS-CBN's Karen Davila. The forum will be simulcast on our news channel, ABS-CBN, TV5, and over 300 broadcast stations nationwide. Some senators call on the Commission on Elections to look into the alleged excessive rates charged by some media outlets for campaign advertisements. During hearing of the Committee on Electoral Reforms and People's Participation, Senator Kiko Pimentel said he has been receiving complaints of possible violations of the Fair Elections Act. Some advertising agencies are reportedly able to negotiate for lower rates. He says rates and discounts to candidates should be the same and not subject to negotiation. Another senator, Miguel Zubiri, says deliberately raising advertising rates discriminates against aspirants who lack funds.
friends in media, we're not here, we're not out for blood. Ang gusto lang po namin, we want to attract the best and the brightest. Fortunately, the best and the brightest do not have the deep pockets that are needed to be able to publish their ads. And because of that, we may not always get the best and the brightest.
The acting director of the COMELEC Campaign Finance Office says the poll body will look into the matter. Get to know some aspirants taking another shot at winning a Senate seat. Former party list representative Nery Colmenares, human rights lawyer Chel Diokno, and civic leader Samira Guto will tackle the country's most pressing issues on our third CNN Philippines Senatorial Forum. Catch them with our anchor and senior correspondent Ruth Cabal on Sunday, January 30th at 7 p.m. only here on CNN Philippines. Up ahead on Newsnight, the country removes the mandatory quarantine requirement for Filipinos flying home, and the upcoming bar exams will go digital, first in the country's history. We'll take a closer look after this break. Welcome back to Newsnight, where we go above and beyond the headlines. The government is now making a pandemic exit plan, and that includes removing the mandatory quarantine requirement for Filipinos flying home. Trisha Tarada has that story.
Starting February 1, fully vaccinated Filipino and foreign travelers coming to the Philippines are no longer required to do mandatory facility-based quarantine. The government is easing travel restrictions and is suspending the country risk classification that tags nations and territories under green, yellow, and red lists. Despite this, incoming passengers must self-monitor for any signs or symptoms for 7 days from arrival. They're also required to present several proofs of vaccination, like a certificate from the WHO, VaxCert-PH, and national or state digital certificate of a foreign government which has accepted VaxCert-PH. All incoming passengers are required to present a negative RT-PCR test result taken within 48 hours prior to departure. Unvaccinated, partially vaccinated, and those with vaccination status that can't be independently verified are still required to undergo facility-based quarantine. The Health Department says the decision is based on science.
Ang sinasabi ng ating mga eksperto, it doesn't make sense anymore because yun pong transmission dito sa ating bansa ay napakataas na. Baka mas mataas pa dun sa mga pinagbabawalan natin ng mga travelers coming from other countries. Hindi po natin kailangan mangamba.
Marami sa ating mga kababayan ang fully vaccinated, and we hope that this would also inspire more of our kababayans to get fully vaccinated. Plus, our tourism workers are fully vaccinated. So kung ganun ang equation, then we felt that it's time to lift the suspension na dapat nagsimula yung December 1 pa.
The Philippines will also begin opening its doors to fully vaccinated foreign tourists from non-visa required countries starting February 10. But their passports must be valid for at least 6 months at the time of arrival, and they must have return tickets. They also need to present valid proofs of vaccination. By February 16, fully vaccinated tourists from any country, regardless if it's non-visa required, will be allowed to enter the Philippines.
Makakabangon na po ang tourism industry at makaka-contribute ito ng malaki sa trabaho, kabuhayan, economic growth ng ating bansa.
Nograles says the easing of travel restrictions is part of the government's pandemic exit plan. Trisha Tarada, CNN Philippines.
Authorities will announce the new alert level for Metro Manila this weekend. The health department says the national capital region is now down to moderate risk for COVID-19 from a critical level the last 3 weeks. The agency explains infections and hospital admissions are on the decline, but the average number of daily cases this week are still more than double the figures reported before the Omicron surge. In the meantime, the Okta Research Group says the downtrend is not enough reason to shift Metro Manila to alert level 2.
Healthcare utilization is at low risk, but the other metrics are still high. For example, the average daily attack rate will still be high, and the positivity rate will still be above 10%. And I think those will be major considerations in deciding whether to go down to alert level 2.
Okta says it will still take weeks before Metro Manila is considered low risk for the virus. The group projects cases in the region to go down to between 500 to 1,000 daily by mid-February. Some Metro Manila mayors prefer to keep the region under the current restrictions for now. Quezon City Mayor Joy Belmonte believes alert level 3 should be kept for the first half of February, citing data from Okta. Belmonte adds a number of holidays and festivities will take place during the first 2 weeks of next month, which may again lead to higher transmission. San Juan City is also seeing lower infections, but Mayor Francis Zamora says it is better to wait until cases further go down and that the downtrend is sustained.
Is 77.76% drop in active cases only in 15 days. Base sa trend na ito, mas gusto ko sanang makitang bumaba pa ng konti, araw-araw naman nakukuha natin ang datos. At kung nakikita natin na talagang mabilis naman ang pagbaba ng bilang at umabot na tayo dun sa point na we all feel that it is again safe to downgrade the alert level to 2, then I will agree.
CNN Philippines is reaching out to other Metro Manila mayors for comment. Uncertainty still lingers with the possibility of more mutations after Delta and Omicron. Experts say vaccines plus masks are key to keeping the public better prepared. In other countries like the United States, high-filtration masks are now handed out for free. Our senior correspondent David Santos finds out if the Philippines should follow suit.
As experts now say N95 masks offer the best protection against COVID-19, what do our kababayans have to say?
Mahal naman, tapos hirapan kang huminga.
Sa N95 kasi parang nakukulob yung hininga ko. Kung iisipin natin, mas magastos kung magkasakit. Kaya naisip namin talagang gumamit na ng KN95.
In the US, the Biden administration has begun giving away free N95 masks.
Sa ngayon, wala pa tayong ganong recommendation kagaya doon sa US.
In 2020, President Duterte also ordered the distribution of free cloth masks, but these are now considered least effective to combat hyper-infectious COVID variants. While the health department is now recommending the use of respirators like N95, cheaper options like surgical and cloth masks, it says, are still good enough.
Ang importante natin ngayon titingnan ay yung pagsuot nito na tama ang pagsuot at saka pagsuot nito sa mga lugar na kinakailangan mataas ang protection.
But for a former government consultant, DOH should review its mask guidelines. The recent explosion of COVID cases in Metro Manila were largely blamed on the fast-spreading Omicron also raises some questions whether it's time to upgrade our standards on mask use.
Kung ang problema natin ay ganyan, NCR, which is a densely populated area, despite na cover ka by bakuna, and still nagkaroon tayo ng problema, ano yung missing problem doon?
The bigger question, can Filipinos afford N95s which cost more or less 100 pesos each? Dr. Liachon says government should give away free N95s at least to poor families where also most of the unvaccinated belong.
Kasi the middle class and the upper class can take care of themselves. But the poor, the only way that they can protect themselves is actually through the masks.
National COVID Task Force Advisor Dr. Ted Herbosa, however, is not dialing down on the idea of free N95s.
I think one of the things na pwede natin gawin talaga ay magbigay ng higher quality mask sa ating mga kababayan na hindi maka-afford nito, no? Very important yan, lalo na kung high risk sila.
But then, there's also the question of supply.
Kasi nga, baka maubusan naman ng supply sa ating healthcare workers. So, binabalansin natin yan.
Of course, priority healthcare workers natin. But, marami ma-hospital if you will not take care of the patients as well.
Mas maganda kung libre na yan. Kasi, kasi po, dagdag sa gastusin ng pamilya
kung magbibigay, mas mabuti.
Pinoys now can only hope the government could deliver for free. David Santos, CNN Philippines.
Adults who received Sinopharm vaccines can now get booster shots. The health department says they can have Sinopharm, AstraZeneca, Moderna, or Pfizer as additional doses. The agency also allowed the use of Sputnik Light as a booster for those who received AstraZeneca, Moderna, Pfizer, and Sinovac.
Paalala lamang po na ang eligible pa lamang sa ating booster shots ay ang mga 18 years old at pataas. Amin din pong nililinaw na ang mga nabanggit na booster doses ay nakadepende pa rin sa available vaccines sa inyong mga vaccination sites o sa mga local governments.
Sinopharm and Sputnik Light, however, cannot be given as boosters for pregnant and breastfeeding mothers. Now, the upcoming bar exams for 2020 and 2021 will go digital for the first time amid the COVID-19 pandemic. Stanley Gaheta walks us through the process.
Chester Salazar will finally take the bar examination this year after almost 2 years of delay. He is in isolation as fully vaccinated examinees need to present negative RT-PCR test results taken within 72 hours before the first exam. Day 1 of the exam is on February 4th, the second is on the 6th. It would also be the first time for takers to use laptops through a downloaded software.
This is the hardest bar examination because hindi lang mental gymnastics or yung kakayanan namin as a future lawyer, but also our capacity, our own health is also at stake.
For the first time in its 120-year history, the Philippine bar exams this year will be digitalized by shifting to the use of laptops instead of traditional handwritten exams, and by allowing not just one, but several venues across the country to be used as test centers. Meanwhile, Attorney Greg Sarmiento took the bar exam a year before the pandemic, the last batch of examinees at a centralized test center. He says even with the changes, he believes it won't compromise the process.
I believe in the integrity naman of the Supreme Court. Pag-type nila sa laptop and then pag-send nila ng answers would go smoothly. In terms of preparation, so it affects their mental preparation as well.
Chief Justice Alexander Hesmundo has pushed the Supreme Court to shift to digitalization, and the pandemic hastened it. On January 24th, the court allowed examinees to keep reviewers in laptops that they will use but warned against cheating. Another prohibition, examinees cannot connect to the internet during the test.
What we have known and heard from the Supreme Court, through especially our bar chairman, is that this is the first time that they mobilized thousands of people to facilitate this bar examinations.
The court will not allow backup computers if examinees spill anything on their laptops. Meanwhile, setting up other testing sites will allow more people to take the exam amid travel restrictions. In Metro Manila, the testing centers will include De La Salle University, University of Makati, FEU Manila, Ateneo Rockwell, and UP Diliman.
We trust in the wisdom of the court and its ability to be able to master the needed manpower and technology to have these bar exams conducted.
There will be a number of changes brought about by the pandemic, but exam takers believe it would not lessen their chances at becoming full-fledged lawyers someday. Stanley Gahete, CNN Philippines.
Still ahead on Newsnight, it is Team LeBron versus Team Durant yet again for the NBA's annual midseason classic. Find out more about the rest of the starters. And a beloved animated character is ditching her dress for a new look. Details about the makeover for Minnie Mouse after the break. Welcome back to CNN Philippines. Which powerhouse players are set to lead the NBA All-Star teams this year? LeBron James and Kevin Durant are captains again for the annual Mid-Season Classic. This is LeBron's 5th straight season leading and 18th straight year playing for an All-Stars team, placing him at second most in the league's history, along with Kobe Bryant. Big names like Steph Curry of the Golden State Warriors and Giannis Antetokounmpo of the Milwaukee Bucks also made the pool of starters. And making our way to France, Heart Evangelista has been serving looks and turning heads with her outfits for Paris Fashion Week. The Filipina style icon showed off a Pinoy-made design yesterday, this black and white custom dress from Pinoy designer Mark Bloomgarner. Heart also dazzled in head-to-toe Dior at the beginning of the week, and with the outfit reveal came big news. The star told fans that she is now part of the Dior family. Fashion News went on to wear more looks from globally renowned designers, including this pattern Chanel ensemble. And going back to fashion, but this time in the animated world, Mickey Mouse's partner is due for a makeover. Gone is the red polka dot dress. Disney says Minnie Mouse will debut this new look at Disneyland Paris, called the first ultra chic pantsuit for the beloved character. British fashion designer Stella McCartney designed a new look in honor of Women's History Month this March. And that is it for now. Join me again on News.ph at 7 p.m. I'm Pia Ontiveros for Newsnight, where we go above and beyond the headlines.
RPN, Radio Philippines Network Incorporated, DXPO. Process sa sinag-uksor sa dalan sa inyong radyo. RPN DXKO, ang radyo ronda, ini sa Laglagan sa Cagayan de Oro. Sigahan na may galaon sa katawan, ang damo serbisyo sa tanan. Ang RPN DXKO radyo ronda, sakop sa KBP, kapisanan ng mga broadcaster ng Pilipinas.
Diabetes is a growing problem here at home, with almost 4 million Filipinos living with the disease.
But awareness and better management of its complications can help them live healthier as well as happier. One of the complications is diabetic retinopathy. It happens when high blood sugar levels lead to damage in the eyes, and it typically causes mild vision problems at first, but it could eventually lead to blindness if not managed properly. On the program today, we'll talk more about diabetic retinopathy, its symptoms, types, prevention, as well as treatment. I'm Dr. Freddy Gomez, and welcome to MedTalk Health Talk on CNN Philippines. One in 3 people living with diabetes have some degree of diabetic retinopathy, and every other diabetic and even pre-diabetics are at risk of developing this. Taking active steps to manage it as early as now can help prevent complications and improve your overall health. So let's welcome our guests for today. With us is Dr. Ricardo Papa. He's an ophthalmologist and the Vice President of the Vitreoretina Society of the Philippines. We're also joined by Dr. Lizette Lopez, who's an internal medicine specialist from the UST Hospital. I'll start the discussion with Dr. Rob. Let's talk about what happens when someone has diabetic retinopathy.
People with diabetic retinopathy, there hardly are any symptoms. So that is actually the dangerous part, because the patients, they think everything's going fine, and then later on when they start to develop the complications of diabetic retinopathy, that's when they start coming in, and by that time sometimes it's very difficult to reverse the changes that have happened. So that's why our advocacy is to screen early, to catch it early, and to treat it early and prevent the complications of diabetic retinopathy.
Dr. Lizette, how does someone develop diabetes? Let's explain that to our viewers.
Diabetes, it's a complicated disease in a way. So what happens is there's 2 insults. Generally, there's a genetic component, but not always required. And then we have the lifestyle part, which a lot of people are familiar with, wherein if we have the poor diet in terms of higher sugar intake, yung mahilig sa chocolate, ice cream, and all of that, as well as the carbs. So in Asia, especially in the Philippines, we like our carbohydrates. We have it in our drinks, we have it in our rice, we have it in our everything, in the food and the desserts and everything else. That is a big factor as to why there is a high prevalence of diabetes in our country.
Dr. Rob mentioned that during the initial phases, the symptoms are very mild or hardly any symptoms at all. But are there any red flags, Dr. Rob, that our viewers, especially our viewers with diabetes, should watch out for?
They can have perfect vision, but there are changes already happening. So if you do get symptoms, these symptoms can be very mild. You can have blurring of vision, slight waviness of vision. You can have floaters. Floaters are these black spots floating in the field of vision. So any small changes like that, but they are non-specific, meaning these changes or these symptoms aren't specific to diabetic retinopathy. They can indicate any sort of retina condition in the eye. So when they see those, they should immediately go to their ophthalmologist.
Dr. Rob, what other factors aside from having diabetes can contribute to having a more severe form of diabetic retinopathy?
When we have diabetic patients, I always tell them, you have to go to your cardiologist or endocrinologist. You have to manage, aside from your diabetes, aside from managing the blood sugar, you have to manage your blood pressure, you have to manage your cholesterol levels, because it's been proven that if these are elevated, the progression of retinopathy will also be faster.
Now, Dr. Lizette, we have generally 2 types of diabetes, either type 1 or type 2. Now, for diabetic retinopathy, are both of these, either type 1 or type 2, people at risk of developing diabetic retinopathy?
It has to do with the pathophysiology or the cause of the diabetic retinopathy is because of the high sugar. So whether they have type 1 or type 2 diabetes, then they can have diabetic retinopathy. For type 1 patients, we generally tell them to get the screening or to get their eyes checked with the ophthalmologist 5 years after the initial diagnosis of type 1 diabetes, because it presents immediately. So people would go to the hospital once they have the symptoms, and that's soon after the disease starts. For type 2 diabetes, because generally people may have it for a while, for years, without really feeling it or without knowing that they have diabetes. So the moment it's diagnosed, we tell them to get screened for diabetic retinopathy already.
The longer a person has diabetes, the more likely they'll develop diabetic retinopathy. Dr. Rob, there are actually two types of diabetic retinopathy. Could you explain this to our viewers?
There is the non-proliferative type, which is the earlier type of diabetic retinopathy, meaning a lot of times these patients will not have any symptoms at all. And then there is the more serious type, which is the proliferative type of diabetic retinopathy. And this is the type wherein the patient will start to develop new vessels and is at risk for developing hemorrhage. So meaning immediate, there will be blurring of vision, sometimes blinding vision, and a lot of times these patients will sometimes need surgery for management later on.
How can someone prevent this? Because that's what we want to achieve here. We don't want it to reach the severe type or even the proliferative type. So what's your advice to our viewers?
Screening is the most important thing. A number of times I do get patients who have been diabetic for a long time and they don't know that they have to have their eyes checked. We do get a lot of those patients who already have the complications of diabetic retinopathy and they haven't had any eye exam at all. So aside from the screening, they do need to control those risk factors like your blood sugar, the blood pressure, and cholesterol, as mentioned earlier.
Now, if proliferative diabetic retinopathy is left untreated, it can lead to serious complications. And we'll talk about what these are when we return. Stay with us on MedTalk Health Talk, your partner in healthcare. This is CNN Philippines. I'm Dr. Freddy Gomez and welcome back to MedTalk Health Talk. When you're living with diabetes, complications may develop over time. For one, diabetic retinopathy is a potentially blinding eye complication, and early detection, as in most diseases, is key. Now, Dr. Liz, going back to diabetes, aside from this diabetic retinopathy, which of course we want to prevent, there are other complications in other parts of the body which diabetes can actually do. What are some of the more severe cases if diabetes is left untreated?
So we have the complications for the microvascular disease, and that's the eye, so the retinopathy, which we're talking about now. We also have, which most people are familiar with, for the nephropathy, or those who will require eventually dialysis if it's not treated. So the kidneys are affected. And then we have the nerves, and that's actually very common as well. A lot of our patients say tusok or some numbness or thickening of their hands and feet, and that's the neuropathy. What most people are not aware of is that even the nerves for the internal organs are affected. So there's the problems with the heart, wherein the blood pressure may fluctuate. There's also problems with constipation, with prolonged food in the stomach. For the more severe complications, we have the amputation because of problems in the big vessels going towards the feet. And therefore, there's also the problem with poor wound healing. And then, of course, we have the strokes and the heart attacks because there are problems already with the blood vessels in the heart or the blood vessels going towards the brain.
Going back to Dr. Rob. Dr. Rob, so it can be hand in hand. Someone with diabetes can not only have diabetic retinopathy but other factors in their body as well. But focusing on the extreme side of diabetic retinopathy, you talked about some hemorrhages. What will the patient feel kapag malala na yung kanyang diabetic retinopathy?
The main thing is really blurring of vision. So you can get macular edema, and then you can also get vitreous hemorrhage and something known as tractional retinal detachment. So a lot of the symptoms there are basically blurring of vision. If you get blood in your vitreous area, so the vitreous is this gel which is normally clear, and when that fills up with blood, it will cover your view. So the doctor cannot see inside to check the retina. The patient can't see out of his eye to see anything else.
Dr. Rob, many people might be asking if they reach this point and they do lose their vision because of those factors, Which one here are reversible and which ones are permanent?
Both are reversible. So when you have macular edema, there are various treatments that we can give. You can give injections of a medication. You can give laser. For vitreous hemorrhage, you can do surgery if it's not clearing after a certain period of time. When you talk about being reversible, sometimes if the macular edema is there for such a long period of time, it's very difficult to reverse. And that's what I was referring to earlier when I said that prevention is always better than cure, because when you get these changes, it's very hard to reverse the changes. So we can clear the blood, but if there's damage that happens to the macular area, it's very hard to bring the patient back to his normal 20/20 vision. So again, if you're watching, please get yourself screened if you haven't already.
Dr. Rob, I'd like to also talk about a very common eye condition that a lot of our viewers know about, and that is glaucoma. Could you talk about the link between glaucoma and diabetic retinopathy?
So glaucoma is a condition wherein the optic nerve of the eye is affected. It's caused by a series of changes in the eye, and most common of which is the rise in intraocular pressure. So the eye has a certain pressure level, and if it rises beyond the normal levels, the optic nerve becomes choked, blood cannot flow very well to the optic nerve, and eventually it dies. So the link between diabetes and glaucoma, it's usually the end stage. So when you have a lot of proliferation of these new vessels, they will block the angles in the eyes.
Dr. Liz, I'd like to go back to diabetes ulit para doon sa mga hindi aware, because it's very easy to not know na diabetic ka na pala or pre-diabetic ang isang tao. What's the best test for someone to undertake to know their glucose status?
It should be, the screening is for the fasting blood sugar, so that's an 8-hour fast with no fluids and nothing, no food, of course. And then also an HbA1c, although we have to make sure it's a good quality HbA1c, because there are a lot of laboratories which may not have the best quality HbA1c.
Okay.
The fasting blood sugar for normal is less than 100. For 100 to 125 is the impaired fasting glucose or yung papuntang diabetes. And then 126 and above is diabetes. And for the HbA1c, it is less than 5.7% for normal. And then pre-diabetes is 5.7 to 6.4%, above 6.5% and above is diabetes.
Dr. Rob, let's talk about screening now for diabetic retinopathy. Explain to our viewers what this entails. A lot of our viewers would like to know, is this painful? Is this tolerable? Tell them how it goes.
When you have an appointment with your ophthalmologist, they will do the basic examination. They'll check your vision, check your refraction, check the pressure of the eye. And one of the final examinations that they do is they dilate the pupil. So the pupil is this black hole in the middle of your iris. So normally it's small, it's about 2 to 3 millimeters. So we will place drops in the eye to dilate it to about 8 to 9 millimeters. And this allows us to see the back part of the eye, which is the retina. So it's not painful, but you will get a lot of glare when you go out. So we tell patients that you will have a hard time reading near objects because you cannot accommodate. And 2, you will have difficulty if there's bright light out. So you will have a lot of glare. So wearing of shades will help out. But definitely it's not painful.
When it comes to these screening tests, where should our viewers go for the most accurate results?
Any ophthalmologist should be able to do that. If you tell them that you are a diabetic and you want to have your retina checked, or even if you just tell them that you're a diabetic, most of them should know enough to do a retina exam. So some of these major hospitals, they will take a photo of your retina, and this, once it gets read, it will indicate there if you do have changes from diabetes or not.
Apart from regular screening, managing diabetes is an effective way to prevent diabetic retinopathy. We'll talk about the best practices when we return. We want to be your partner for a lifetime of good health, so stay with us here on CNN Philippines. more common complications of diabetes is diabetic retinopathy. Today, we're talking about how to avoid, manage, and treat this condition. I'm Dr. Freddy Gomez, and this is MedTalk Health Talk, where your health always comes first. Sometimes diabetic retinopathy can't be prevented. Symptoms often don't appear until the condition progresses. And we mentioned that regular screening is key in preventing severe vision loss. But a healthy lifestyle needs to come hand in hand. Dr. Liz, can you share with our viewers some of the best practices in managing someone's blood glucose and trying to keep it in that very healthy range?
Always the diet and the exercise still, so aside from the medications. Actually, I tell patients the most important part of the management is diet. So if they don't eat properly, then what happens is the medications will either not work very well or you just keep going up on them and then they end up on insulin. So the diet part is so generally that eat more vegetables first, non-starchy vegetables, right? So the more of the leafy ones and yung mga ampalaya and things like that for half of the plate. And then 1/4 of the plate is the just the carbohydrate, and that includes the starchy vegetables. And then we have the proteins at 1/4 of the plate. And the drinks, that's what we should really tell patients, like avoid all sugary drinks as much as possible. Okay. Then we have the exercise or the lifestyle part. And the general rule is, so moderate intensity exercise. It used to be 150 minutes per week. So that's around 2.5 hours a week, split up like every 2 to 3 days. However, what happens is that these days, because of the pandemic and people are unable to go out, the guidelines have increased to 200 minutes of moderate intensity exercise. High intensity exercise is 75 minutes per week, and that's if they can't even talk, or they can barely talk, or just in phrases. So that's they really should have that sort of activity.
Now, Dr. Rob, I'd like to go to treatment when it comes to diabetic retinopathy. Let's start first with the non-proliferative type. What is the general treatment for this?
So for non-proliferative, it's basically observation. We tell the patient, the most important thing you can do is go regularly to your endocrinologist, because we need you to control all those risk factors, the blood sugar, the blood pressure, the cholesterol. And they usually just follow up with us once a year if there are none, or there's no retinopathy, or if there's mild retinopathy. If the retinopathy is around moderate, then maybe we see them every 5 to 6 months. So if it's not that severe, it's just observation.
Now, what's the prognosis for these types of procedures, Dr. Rob? How likely are they to regain their vision if they indeed have lost a certain percentage of it?
So the prognosis is usually dependent on how affected the macula is. So it can range from anywhere from 50% lower to 100%, especially in those cases where the macula is not affected at all. So if you have traction, when you say traction detachment, when you have proliferation, when you have blood, eventually the blood settles down. It forms membranes over the retina. The membranes can pull, and from being an attached retina, it gets pulled and it becomes detached. So if the macula is detached, the prognosis is guarded, meaning we don't know if the vision will return even if we put the macula back in place. So the patient should be wary if the macula is affected.
Dr. Rob, how often should people or diabetics screen for diabetic retinopathy?
Type 2 diabetics, they should see an ophthalmologist right away. Why? Because we don't know when their diabetes started. It could have started. Sometimes they tell me, Doctor, I was diagnosed with diabetes yesterday, but when I look into their eye, I already see proliferative retinopathy. And I tell them, your diabetes has probably been in there for about 3 to 5 years. So immediately when they are diagnosed as diabetics, they should see an ophthalmologist right away.
Thank you, ophthalmologist Dr. Ricardo Papa and internal medicine specialist Dr. Lizette Lopez, for sharing with us your insights. Here on MedTalk Health Talk, we hope to give you the knowledge and care that you need. I'm Dr. Freddy Gomez, and we'll see you again next time. Stay safe, everyone.